Hello, my name is Matthew Cohen. It is November 15th, 2010, and I'm here in Cambridge with Dr. James Ackerman. We're here conducting an interview to discuss proportional systems in the history of architecture to be shown at a conference of that name to be held in Leiden in March 2011. So, hello.
Hello. I'm sorry I'm not there in person. I'd like to have been, but it's become too difficult for me to make short trips of this nature because of my age. And I look forward to knowing what occurs in this very imaginative reconstruction of a proportion conference that was held in Milan in 1951.
We're going to be talking about that anniversary, but let me first talk about another anniversary. You just celebrated your 91st birthday 1 week ago today.
Right.
Happy birthday.
Thank you. I'm still at it.
Yes, you are. So, 1951, you were invited to participate in the conference held in Milan on architectural proportion on the occasion of the Triennale in Milan. That was your second trip to Milan, wasn't it, at that time?
Yes, well, after the close of the Second War, I was in the Fifth Army in Italy, and when the final stage arrived rapidly in the north of Italy, all the way to Como, and then settled in barracks nearby. And I got bored and asked for permission to go to Milan and work with the Office of Monuments and Fine Arts. And I was sent at that time to Pavia to the recover archival material from the Royal Palace in Milan, and I went there daily to with a truck and waited while the workers that had been hired piled the archives into trucks. And in the meanwhile, I spent a lot of time wandering around the Certosa, and it became the stimulus for me to turn into architectural history. And I wrote my master's thesis on the subject of this very strange church, which was a revival of Romanesque rather than antique architecture.
And then just 6 years later, you find yourself in Milan again.
Yes, at this conference where I was the youngest member, having been invited by Rudolf Witkover as a result of my work on the documents of Milan Cathedral, which were a extraordinary revelation of proportion in late medieval architecture. And after publishing this, it got a lot of attention because it was virtually the sole source of understanding of this era in Gothic and in proportions.
Now, as it happens, our conference is falling on the 60th anniversary of that conference in Milan. So it's a good opportunity to reflect on that moment in history and what's happened since, and maybe what we should be looking for now in the study of proportion and proportional systems. Can you talk about that moment in history, 1951? Why was there this tremendous interest in proportion and proportional systems?
I think it was partly that it was very close to the end of the war, and the war had been so disruptive in Europe, and all the participants, with the exception of myself, were Europeans. It had been so destructive that there was a sense of seeking for some kind of principle of order in the universe. It was incredibly ambitious in its program. The idea was that there was some kind of universal order in biology, physics, art, in the whole element of contemporary culture that required a strong affirmation of positive thinking, I would say, in relation to contemporary culture. And there was something almost religious about the commitment to the idea of universal harmony. And of course, it was closely allied to contemporary architecture. And what was also extraordinary about it was that Rudolf Witkover and Le Corbusier were partners in organizing it. That a scholar like Witkover, who had dealt with proportions in the Renaissance in a recent book called Architectural Principles in the Age of Humanism, and Le Corbusier, who had been working on a system of proportions of his own called the modular, wanted to join scholars and artists, not just architects, but painters and sculptors, painters like Fontana and Severini, and architects like Nervi and Ernesto Rogers, and then there was Max Bill, a sculptor. It was a very strong selection of participants. Siegfried Gideon was an important part of it, and he was a very influential voice in the understanding of contemporary architecture.
How would you characterize the study of proportion before that time, and what influence do you think that conference had on that study?
Before that time, there were it really hadn't become a reliable study. There was a lot of mysticism around it. Some of the mystics were part of the conference too, which is only fair. And but it was really the end of the mystical phase, and the effort to set it onto a reliable, academic, practical grounds. And my explanation for what went on overall was that in contemporary art of the early 20th century, the whole revolution that was exemplified in the work of Le Corbusier, in this area, ornament had been totally eliminated, and the entry of proportion into the architectural vision had to do with attempting to find a mathematical and aesthetic substitute for the ornament that had been rejected in modernism. And this underscores the architectural attitude of the time. It wasn't so easy to explain in the pictorial arts, except that they too had become abstract and not representational. And so that was another reason for finding a alternative aesthetic.